The stars above Covia Prime pulsed in quiet rhythm, their indifference a cruel backdrop to the screams below. Flames licked the edges of the planetary outpost, but inside the floating triage station Mercy 1, calm precision ruled. Blood was universal, and so was the act of saving lives. Human medics moved between species with muscle memory and empathy, sealing wounds, stabilizing vitals, performing miracles with nanite gels and pressure foam. Lieutenant Mara Calder steadied her hands over the thoracic cavity of a groaning Trolloth soldier, her voice calm even as its 6 limbs convulsed from shock. "Hold him," she said. "One more second." She didn't care that this soldier had likely been on the front lines a week ago, tearing through human infantry with those same claws. Out here, none of that mattered. The red cross on her shoulder wasn't symbolic, it was sacred. Above her, drones buzzed quietly, auto-suturing flesh that minutes ago had been shrapnel-ripped. Nearby, a young medic, barely 20, tapped vitals onto a hollow pad, sweat streaking down his face despite the regulated temperature. He glanced at Calder. "We're out of glucoresin." Calder didn't look up. "Use chloralx. It'll hurt like hell, but it'll bind." The kid hesitated. "He's not even human," he muttered. She gave him a look sharp enough to silence an artillery strike. "Neither were the ones that saved my brother on New Damascus. Pain doesn't care about species." The kid nodded and moved. Orbital comms buzzed in her ear. "Mercy 1, this is Relay K Theta. Incoming civilian shuttles from Arvex 4, heavy casualties. Estimated 300 souls." Calder swore under her breath. They were already packed beyond regulation limits. "Copy that, Relay. Divert them to Mercy 2. "Wait, what happened to Mercy 2? The pause that followed said everything. Then the voice, quiet, almost ashamed. "No response from Mercy 2. Possibly destroyed. Last ping from orbit before silence." The air inside the station shifted. It wasn't fear, not yet. It was confusion, like the moment before a tide pulls out too far. On the bridge, Commander IMI Grant stood over the holomap, his eyes tracking dozens of red pings turning black. Human medical ships, clearly marked, fully registered, neutral by all galactic laws, were going dark one by one. Grant tapped his comm. "Get me Geneva." The AI blinked to life, its avatar shaped like a child's hand-drawn dove. "The Geneva Accord has been invalidated in 4 systems. By Imperial command." "You mean to tell me," Grant said slowly, "that the Empire just nullified the oldest rule of warfare?" The AI hesitated. "The Empire has officially designated all human medical units as tactical threats due to excessive recovery capability and battlefield outcome manipulation." Grant clenched his jaw. "They're not even pretending anymore." Below, Calder had just finished stabilizing the Trolloth when the floor trembled. The tremor was subtle, but every seasoned medic paused. That wasn't internal. Then the sirens began. Grant's voice thundered across the intercoms. "This is not a drill. We are under attack. Defensive positions. Evacuate non-ambulatory patients to inner bulkheads." Calder sprinted through the corridors. "You heard him. Move." Outside the viewport, the Empire's warships materialized from slipspace, sleek, obsidian arcs bristling with phase cannons and annihilation lances. They didn't broadcast warnings. They didn't jam communications. They simply opened fire. A beam sliced through Mercy 1's portside hangar, vaporizing recovery wards and 27 patients mid-transfusion. A plasma lance followed, hitting a secondary reactor. Internal gravity failed. Screams echoed through the station as fire and air were sucked into space. Calder gripped the overhead rail, dragging herself through zero-G, her eyes wide with disbelief. Not even the Dominion had broken the triage code. Not even the pirates at Haver's Rift. This was something else. Something worse. She reached the armory, not for weapons, but for the last-ditch medical kits. She slapped one into her chest harness and turned toward the children's ward. If they were going to die, they'd die under her care. She never made it. The blast ripped through 3 decks, collapsing corridors, and choking the emergency lights with ash. Her last thoughts weren't fear or rage. They were of her brother, long buried. She'd promised to never stop saving lives. And in the end, she didn't. Far above Earth, the footage played in silence. Commanders, diplomats, senators, all watched as the final moments of Mercy One unfolded. No one spoke. No one moved. Admiral Royce stood at the edge of the chamber, a hand over his mouth. He had served in the Second Colonial War, seen atrocities carved into moons, but nothing like this. General Arden Knox stepped forward, eyes locked on the last frame, Calder's face lit in the fire, reaching for a patient she couldn't save. He turned toward the assembly. How many? A young analyst swallowed. 93 ships, 11,000 medics, 2,000 alien civilians, all gone. Knox nodded once, slowly. Who gave the order? Imperial High Strategos. Full chain of command authorization. There's no room for doubt. Good, Knox said, voice calm. He turned and walked out of the room. Behind him, a few senior officials murmured about sanctions, diplomatic protest, UN tribunal proceedings. Knox didn't stop walking. He descended 2 levels beneath the Central Command complex, past security clearances meant for wartime protocols, into a lift that had not moved in 27 years. The walls bore no labels. At the base of the shaft was a room sealed in alloy, so dense it couldn't be scanned. Inside, one simple terminal blinked with dormant power. Knox entered the code. A string of numbers, a date no one dared speak aloud. The lights flickered, gas hissed, and the floor began to open. He stared down at the massive cryovault beneath, rows of containment pods, each one stamped with a red triangle and a serial number. No names, no records, just one label above the vault entrance, Operation Lazarus. A voice stirred behind him, dry, mechanical, amused. I was wondering how long you'd wait. Knox didn't look back. It's time. You said never again, the voice said. You buried us for what we did. And I stand by that, Knox replied. But they broke the only law that mattered. They killed the people who wouldn't fight. That makes this bigger than revenge. This is necessity. Another voice, raspier, laughed softly. Necessity. We love that word. The lights overhead pulsed red. Within the vault, containment pod 001 began to thaw. Inside, a figure shifted, skeletal and massive, body laced with dermal implants and surgical scars. Eyes opened, amber, predator bright. Pod 002 followed. Then 003. The temperature dropped despite the warming process, as if the vault itself remembered what these men had done. Knox stood still. You were never meant to be unleashed. Not unless Earth itself was bleeding. Pod 004 hissed open. A woman stepped out, hair shaved, arms covered in inked war records, each a tally of something unspeakable. She grinned at Knox. Looks like someone finally got scared enough. He handed her a datapad. This is where they are. The Empire's Medical Strike Command. Coordinates, names, locations. We don't need prisoners. We need a message. She took the pad. Her smile faded. In its place, hunger. You're sure you want us? Knox's voice was iron. They killed our medics. Silence answered him. And then, one by one, the war criminals stepped out of their pods, flexing limbs that hadn't moved in decades, stretching the ghosts from their muscles. A siren pulsed once, low and long, through the vault. Above, in orbit, 5 black ships lifted off from secret hangars beneath the Martian crust. They carried no insignia, no crew but the damned. Back in the Imperial fleet, Stratego Zareth reviewed the footage from Mercy One with faint curiosity. He watched the human medics scramble, heard their calls for help go unanswered. He turned to his advisor. What was their mistake? Too visible, the advisor replied. Too righteous. They forgot this is a galaxy of power, not pity. Zareth nodded. Then let that be a lesson. A faint ping interrupted them. A long-range transmission. Scrambled. Human origin. Zareth frowned. We jammed their emergency relays. The tech swallowed. This isn't an emergency broadcast. It's something else. The hologram resolved. A single human figure in shadow. No name. No rank. Just a phrase. Operation Lazarus initialized. Zareth leaned forward. What is Lazarus? No one answered. And outside the viewport, one star in the distance blinked unnaturally. Like an eye-opening. The black ships moved without broadcasting. No transponders, no signatures, no noise. They slipped through folds of space like knives through silk, immune to scans, their hulls coated in non-reflective dark matter composites, designed during an era when humanity fought itself for survival. The war criminals on board had no allegiance to Earth, not anymore. They had been erased from history by design. But now, with vengeance sanctioned, they moved with purpose. Inside the lead vessel, codenamed Gravedigger, the command deck remained dimly lit, more mausoleum than bridge. The woman known only as Monroe stood before a tactical interface, her arms crossed over a combat vest stitched with old blood. Her eyes flicked through dossiers, her face unreadable. 5 targets, 5 systems, 5 architects of the massacre. Behind her, Bishop clicked his augmented fingers together in rhythmic patterns, each tap sending encrypted commands to the ship's internal systems. He was thinner than most remembered, his bones reinforced with carbon threading, his skin marred by orbital burns. A legend among ghosts. Monroe had once said he could kill a man by sound alone. Bishop didn't speak much anymore. Another figure entered, broader than both of them, carrying a makeshift hammer crafted from repurposed ship plating. His name was Holt, and he spoke only in absolutes. Monroe didn't turn. We've got movement in the Talar vortex. Patrol routes are tighter. They're scared. Good, Holt said. Fear means noise. Noise means we can track them. They're not running, Bishop added, his voice brittle. They're baiting. Monroe exhaled through her teeth. Let them try. The first target was in the Galara system, Admiral Ceterius Lowe, architect of the medical suppression doctrine. A man who, in courtly language, had redefined triage as enemy battlefield sustainability infrastructure. A bureaucrat in public, a butcher in truth. They didn't come through the front. That wasn't how war criminals hunted. They dropped Gravedigger out of folded space a half-light year away, then coasted in on gravitational eddies, avoiding detection nets with terrifying precision. On board Lowe's command station, the atmosphere remained calm. He stood at a crystal viewport, sipping fermented Rithik nectar, admiring the gas storms of Galara Prime. His advisors whispered reports about planetary stabilization and diplomatic pushback from human colonies. But none of it pierced his indifference. He had orchestrated a strategic masterpiece. The humans had reacted exactly as expected. Confusion, grief, protocol debates. Predictable. Then his head of security collapsed mid-sentence, blood streaming from his ears. The lights flickered. For the first time in decades, Lowe tasted something unfamiliar in his throat. Dread. Bishop moved like silence incarnate. His sonic disruptors disabled internal communications, while Holt bypassed security doors, using a device that dated back to the Martian coup era. Monroe led the breach, her eyes cold, her weapon never aimed twice. They found Lowe in his private meditation chamber. He tried to speak, to negotiate, perhaps to apologize. Holt drove the hammer into the wall beside his head. You called our healers a liability, Monroe said. Lowe's voice quivered. They were battlefield multipliers. You murdered them. There are rules, he insisted, his breath hitching. There are limits even now. There were, Monroe said. You wrote new ones. They didn't kill him quickly. That wasn't the point. By the time Lowe's command station began transmitting distress beacons, All it managed to broadcast was static overlaid with one clear signal, a single red triangle pulsing over the Empire's crest. The Empire interpreted it as a rogue signal, but the veterans, those who remembered Earth's last civil war, recognized it instantly. The Butchers were back. On Earth, General Knox watched the transmission in silence. Around him, the Joint Council scrambled to frame a response. News feeds spun out of control. Public opinion split. Some called the released criminals monsters. Others called them justice incarnate. Knox lit a cigarette with shaking fingers. He hadn't smoked in 12 years. A junior officer approached, unsure whether to salute or scream. "Sir, Intel confirms second strike en route. Stratego Zaven Kale is next." Knox stared at the digital map. 5 red dots remained. For after Kale. Let them do what they were made for. "Sir, the UN want a leash on them. They're worried." "Good. That means the Empire's terrified." Across the galaxy, the Empire shifted its stance. Military police were deployed in civilian sectors. Propaganda flooded communication lines, branding the war criminals as terrorists. But they didn't use names. They couldn't. No Imperial official dared admit that the men and women haunting their dreams were once sealed away by human courts for crimes too grotesque to archive. Avon Kale, stationed aboard the dreadnought Calestis Ascendancy, had once stood before a galactic tribunal and argued that battlefield neutrality was an obsolete concept. His policies had led to the execution of unarmed medics on Karos, the burning of refugee clinics in orbit over Mira 6, and the sterilization of a medical university on Arcadia. He had never been touched. Until now. The Gravedigger intercepted his ship mid-orbit, faking an Imperial transcode to gain access through the outer perimeter. By the time security realized what had happened, Monroe and her unit were already inside. Kale tried to flee. Holt caught him with a brutal shoulder to the spine and dragged him through his own command deck in full view of his officers. Bishop didn't say a word. He simply locked the doors behind them and disabled internal sensors. They recorded nothing. But hours later, Calestis Ascendancy was found adrift, systems functional, crew intact, save one. Kale's body was never recovered, but a single red triangle had been carved into his command throne. Panic began to spread. In Imperial strategy halls, meetings turned frantic. Generals stopped sleeping. Secure transports rerouted. Advisors abandoned outer colonies for core worlds. Because these weren't assassinations. They were executions. And they were personal. No warnings. No demands. No claims of credit. Just blood and silence. On Gravedigger, Holt stood at the viewport watching a pair of moons collide in the far distance. The celestial impact glowed like a slow supernova. "We're making noise," he said. Bishop adjusted the encryption filters. "We were never meant to be quiet forever." "They'll send the Red Paladins next," Monroe said. "They can try." She looked over the next dossier. Rylak Voss, the alien strategos, who had reclassified human field medics as combat resources and signed the initial order to vaporize the Mercy fleet. His species, the Zevran, prided themselves on logic above emotion. But even the Zevran had nightmares, and they'd forgotten how vividly humans remembered. Monroe tapped the console. "Next target. High orbit over Valtar." She paused. Bishop tilted his head. "What is it?" Her voice dropped. "He has children on board." The silence hung for a moment. It wasn't hesitation. It was calculation. "We go anyway," Holt said. "I know," Monroe replied. "But it changes how we extract." The fact they acknowledged the presence of children didn't make them soft. It made them precise. The Butchers were not indiscriminate. They were surgical. That's what made them terrifying. On board the Imperial carrier over Valtar, Rylak Voss received a private message. No sender. No trace. Just a single line of human script that he had translated and framed during wartime negotiations years ago. "You erased our mercy." He ordered full lockdown. Shields raised. Every corridor armed. But fear had already taken root in his officers. When the power failed, just for 2 seconds, they began to panic. Because everyone knew 2 seconds was all Gravedigger needed. But Monroe didn't enter through the ship. She came from orbit, launched in a stealth drop pod no larger than a coffin. She hit the hull at terminal speed, magnetic clamps engaging mid-impact. By the time Vosguards reacted, she was already inside. She didn't kill him. Not immediately. She forced him to read the casualty list. Every name, every age, every medical specialty. He begged her to stop. She made him finish. Then she injected him with a paralytic and broadcast his vitals galaxy-wide. As Voss lay frozen, eyes wide, heartbeat accelerating, the galaxy watched in real time as his mind unraveled. His pulse hit critical. He died of fear. The transmission ended with the red triangle. Back on Gravedigger, Monroe stood over the last 2 files. Her expression didn't change, but her fingers lingered a second longer on one name. Bishop noticed. You know him. Used to, before he became the Minister of Compliance. Holt lifted an eyebrow. That the one who greenlit the medlab culling on Aurelia? She nodded. Bishop's voice dropped into something almost reverent. Then he dies last. The triangle pulsed again on the console, dim and cold. And in Imperial space, the final 2 targets activated their evacuation protocols. But deep in their hearts, they both knew. There was nowhere left to run. The Imperial Palace stood as a monolithic testament to the Galactic Empire's dominance, its spires piercing the smog-laden skies of Coruscant. Within its fortified walls, Minister of Compliance, Darius Vex, scrutinized the latest intelligence reports with a furrowed brow. The recent eliminations of high-ranking officials had sent tremors through the Empire's core, and Vex knew his name was likely etched onto the butcher's list. Vex was a man of calculated precision, his rise through the ranks marked by ruthless efficiency and an unyielding commitment to order. He had been instrumental in implementing policies that redefined the Empire's approach to warfare, including the controversial decree that led to the decimation of the human medical corps. To him, such measures were necessary cogs in the grand machine of imperial supremacy. As he pondered his next move, Vex's personal communicator chimed, a rare occurrence, given the encrypted nature of his line. He activated the device, and a holographic image flickered to life before him. The figure was cloaked in shadow, but the voice was unmistakable. Minister Vex, the voice intoned, the time has come to discuss your continued survival. Vex's eyes narrowed. Identify yourself. Names are inconsequential, the figure replied. What matters is that I possess information vital to your longevity. Vex weighed the risks. Engaging with an anonymous informant was fraught with peril, but the current climate left little room for caution. Speak. The butchers are closing in, the figure stated. Your standard security protocols are insufficient. However, there exists a sanctuary beyond their reach. Intrigued yet skeptical, Vex leaned forward. And where might that be? Coordinates will be transmitted upon your agreement, the figure said. Time is of the essence. Vex's mind raced. Trust was a scarce commodity, but desperation had a way of tipping scales. Very well. Transmit the coordinates. The hologram dissipated, and moments later, his console displayed a set of coordinates leading to a remote outpost on the fringes of the Outer Rim. Vex wasted no time. He summoned his most loyal guards and prepared for departure, ensuring the journey was shrouded in secrecy. Aboard his personal shuttle, Vex reflected on the recent upheavals. The Butcher's resurgence was an anomaly the Empire hadn't anticipated. Their methods were surgical, their motives deeply personal. Vex had always viewed humans as predictable, their emotional volatility a weakness. Yet, this unpredictability now manifested as a formidable threat. The shuttle emerged from hyperspace, approaching the designated outpost, a desolate station orbiting a barren moon. As they docked, Vex's instincts prickled. The station was eerily silent, devoid of the usual calm chatter. His guards disembarked first, weapons at the ready, scanning for any signs of life. Vex stepped onto the station's cold metal floor, the sound of his boots echoing through the empty corridors. The lighting was dim, casting elongated shadows that danced with each flicker. They advanced cautiously, the tension palpable. A sudden noise, a metallic clang, reverberated from a corridor to their left. The guards snapped to attention, weapons trained on the source. Vex signaled for two of them to investigate. They moved with practiced precision, disappearing around the corner. Silence. Then a gurgled scream. Vex's heart pounded. He gestured for the remaining guards to form a protective perimeter. The air grew thick with anticipation. From the shadows emerged a figure clad in dark armor, a crimson triangle emblazoned on the chest plate. "Monroe." "Minister Vex," she addressed, her voice cold and devoid of emotion. "Running won't save you." Vex straightened, masking his fear with indignation. "You dare assault an imperial minister? Do you comprehend the consequences?" Monroe took a deliberate step forward. "Consequences? Like those faced by the medics you condemned? The innocents who bled out because of your edicts?" Vex's facade cracked slightly. "I acted in the Empire's best interests. Sacrifices are necessary for order." "Order?" Monroe's eyes burned with intensity. "You call massacres and genocide order?" The remaining guards raised their weapons, but Monroe's team materialized from the shadows, weapons trained, outnumbering them. A silent standoff ensued. Vex's mind raced, searching for an escape, a negotiation angle. "What is it you want? Revenge? Justice?" Monroe's gaze didn't waver. "Acknowledgement? Remorse? But for men like you, that's a fantasy." She nodded to her team. In a swift, coordinated motion, they disarmed the guards, restraining them with practiced ease. Vex found himself alone, vulnerable. Monroe approached, her presence imposing. "Your policies killed thousands. Medics, civilians, children. Lives reduced to statistics in your reports." Vex swallowed hard. I was following orders." "Whose orders?" Monroe challenged. "The Emperor's? Or your own ambition?" He had no answer. Monroe leaned in, her voice a whisper. "The Empire's facade is crumbling. The galaxy sees its rot. And figures like you? You're the infection." Vex's bravado shattered. "Please. I can be useful. I have information, resources." Monroe studied him, then spoke over her shoulder. "Bishop." A tall, gaunt man stepped forward, his eyes devoid of mercy. "Yes. Extract whatever intel he has," Monroe ordered. "Then broadcast his confession across all Imperial channels." Vex's eyes widened in terror. "No, you can't." Bishop silenced him with a look. "Oh, but we can." As they led Vex away, Monroe turned to Holt, her second in command. "The Empire's pillars are cracking. It's time to bring the whole structure down." Holt grinned, hefting his weapon. "Let's finish what we started." Monroe cast one last glance at the desolate station, a symbol of the Empire's isolation and decay. The butchers had been unleashed, and there was no turning back. The galaxy would remember their names. Vex's confession echoed through the Empire's communication network like a virus, spreading across the galaxy with relentless speed. As the words left his lips, his fate was sealed. His betrayal would be immortalized in every sector, a stain on the legacy he had once helped to build. Yet, even in his humiliation, he was no longer concerned with the echoes of his fall from grace. His mind was consumed by the undeniable truth. Humanity had outplayed the Empire in a game no one thought possible. From the moment Monroe had captured him, Vex had realized the Empire was no longer in control. He had always believed the human spirit to be an uncontrollable force, one that the Empire could suppress with enough force, discipline, and technology. But it was something more than that, something primal and fierce in its resilience. And now, as the galaxy's most ruthless war criminals were being freed, Vex was confronted with the terrifying possibility that this resistance would reshape everything he had worked for. The Empire was crumbling, and there was no one left to defend it but those it had discarded as outcasts. Back in the depths of the galaxy, Monroe and her team began to formulate their next move. The liberation of the prisoners had been a calculated risk. It was not just the execution of a plan. It was the beginning of a larger, more dangerous campaign against the Empire. They were not just fighting for vengeance. They were fighting for a future in which humanity could stand free, no longer shackled by the iron grip of the Empire. In their ranks were war criminals, assassins, and soldiers of fortune, each one scarred by the Empire's oppression, each one with a personal vendetta to carry out. As they prepared for the next phase of their mission, a deep unease settled over Monroe. The prisoners they had freed were weapons, tools that would turn the tide of this war. But they were also a reminder of the cost of rebellion. The blood that had been shed could not be undone. The war criminals were not saints. They were killers who had seen too much, done too much. But they were useful, and that had to be enough. Monroe. Bishop's voice cut through her thoughts. He stepped into the dimly lit command room, his presence almost as cold as the steel walls surrounding them. We've intercepted another transmission. It's coming from the Imperial fleet. Monroe turned sharply, her eyes narrowing. What is it? They've deployed a fleet of phase ships to the outer rim. They're gathering intel on the recent breakouts. They're coming for us, Bishop replied, his voice devoid of emotion. Monroe's mind raced. The phase ships were a deadly force, capable of slipping through conventional space with little warning. The Empire was mobilizing. Their response would be swift and overwhelming. If they didn't act quickly, they would be wiped out before they had a chance to strike back. But Monroe was not someone who buckled under pressure. She had spent too many years living in the shadows, planning her rise. To let something like this stop her now. We'll need to move fast. Ready the team, she ordered. We strike first. No waiting. No hesitation. As Monroe prepared her crew for the confrontation ahead, Vex sat in the cold, sterile holding cell aboard the Imperial command ship. His mind was a tangled web of regret, bitterness, and the inescapable realization that he had underestimated humanity. He had always thought of them as simple creatures, capable only of survival and self-interest. He had never once considered their capacity for unity, for strategic thought, for evolution. Now, as he awaited his uncertain fate, he could not deny the truth. Humanity had become something greater than the sum of its parts, and he had been its catalyst. The sound of the door opening broke his reverie, and a figure stepped inside. Vex looked up, startled. It was a woman, dressed in the sharp, polished uniform of the Imperial elite. Her face was cold, unreadable, her eyes darkened by the weight of whatever mission she had come to deliver. "I've been sent to offer you a deal," the woman said, her voice low and authoritative. "The Empire can still use you. Your expertise is valuable." Vex's lips twisted into a bitter smile. "The Empire doesn't negotiate with traitors." "You're not a traitor, Minister. You're a tool, and tools can always be repurposed." She took a step closer, her posture unwavering. "We have our eyes on Monroe and her crew. You've proven you know how to handle them. Help us, and we'll restore your position." Vex considered her words carefully. His pride urged him to reject the offer outright, but something else gnawed at him. The humans, Monroe, especially, had forced him to confront a reality he could no longer ignore. The Empire was too far gone, its rot too deep. His survival, if it could even be called that, was a hollow victory. He had become a cog in a machine that no longer served the galaxy's needs. But if he helped this woman, if he turned his back on everything he had known, he could regain his power. He could control the narrative. He could be the one who brought down the rebellion from the inside. "You have a deal," he said, his voice low but resolute. The woman nodded, her expression unreadable. Good. You'll be briefed shortly. We need you to move quickly. Monroe and her team are already planning their next move. As she left, Vex sat in the silence of his cell, contemplating his decision. He had crossed a line, one from which there was no return. The question now was whether he could live with the consequences, and whether his return to the Empire would even matter in the grand scheme of things. The first phase of the conflict was over. The Butchers had played their part, and the galaxy had been forced to reckon with the consequences of their actions. But the war was far from over, and as the Empire regrouped, its eyes now fixed on Monroe's rebellion, Vex realized the true nature of the battle he had chosen. It wasn't just about survival. It was about rewriting the rules of power itself. In the cold, dark expanse of space, alliances were shifting, and loyalties were being tested. The galaxy was on the brink of a new era, one where humanity would no longer kneel to the Empire, but instead carve out its own place in the stars. Whether they succeeded or failed, they had already proven that they were a force to be reckoned with. And in that moment, Vex understood the real cost of defying the Empire. It wasn't just the bloodshed or the power struggles. It was the loss of everything that had once seemed certain.